Hi everyone, this is Jim. Welcome to this Blitz chess postmortem of my Blitz game number 271. I was white, kicked off with e4, and my opponent played e5. And after knight f3, knight c6, I decided to go into the Ruy Lopez instead of the Italian game, which I've been playing recently. So Ruy Lopez is bishop e5, a6, the Morphy defense, and also the main move, and bishop a4. So we have a very standard position here, and now my opponent plays d6, which is actually a decent move and the second choice in this position. Knight f6 is kind of the main line of the Ruy, but d6 is the Steinitz defense deferred. That's the name of it, or sometimes called the modern Steinitz defense. If you back up, the original Steinitz defense was to play d6 right here. Well, I'll go ahead and put it on the board. And later it was considered not to be so good because after d4, white gets a pretty good central presence, and it's not like this is winning or anything, but a decent advantage for white. So this is an improved version of the Steinitz defense when you play the Morphy move a6 first, the bishop retreats, and then you play d6. And now the top choice here, let's take a look at it, is c3. And I think that's a very logical move, just building up the idea of c3 and d4, building up the typical strong center of the Ruy Lopez. Second choice here is castles. That has a pretty good score if you look at the opening book score. So that's also a logical move. After you castle, you have the option of defending the e-pawn with the rook, so you don't need to play d3 to support that pawn, or knight c3. So that's maybe the way I would choose to play, is castles, c3 or castles. Instead, in this position, I played h6, which is not a horrible move. I just wanted to stop this pin and then play d5 here, and there's still some edge for white. You see, it didn't really change things all that dramatically from the engine point of view, but we've gone off the beaten track here. My opponent plays knight f6, and now I go with d3. And, well, we're getting into a region of the database where there are a few games, and most people continue bishop e7 here, but my opponent played bishop d7, also a reasonable move. And we're just out of the opening book at this point, so let's continue. I think we just continue developing normally. I would criticize a couple of these moves that I played here. I need to get in the move c3, because at any time my opponent can play b5, forcing my bishop back here, and then he can play knight a5, and just wins the bishop pair, because the bishop has nowhere to go from this square, basically. Anywhere it goes, it can be taken by a knight. So I need to get in this move c3 so that the bishop has a retreat square on c2, and I didn't play it here, or here would be another chance. And then here's my last chance, knight bd2. I still haven't played c3. I'm just continuing with the typical Ruy Lopez plan of knight to here, to there, which is a good post for the knight, supporting the center, and also preparing maybe for a king-side attack with the jump into f5. But now my opponent takes advantage of my lapse. He kicks out with b5 and knight a5 and just wins the bishop pair. So I play c3 now, just to give myself some options on how I retake the bishop, and also I'm preparing to push on with d4 at the right moment. So he grabs the bishop pair, and now black is pretty much completely equalized. And my best play here is probably to take with the pawn. For some reason, I was only considering knight takes and queen takes. I just wasn't thinking about pawn takes. But it's a very logical move. The rook pawn is sort of the least valuable of all your pawns, because it's only got one side. It's kind of half a pawn in a way. It can only take in one direction. So when you change that rook pawn into a knight pawn, when it goes from the a file to the b file, it suddenly has twice the number of squares that it attacks. So it's an improvement, and it also opens up this file for the rook and gives it something to do. So definitely that's the better way to play. I took with the queen, and the game goes on, but I think black has some slight edge at this point. But all these numbers are very small, so this is all within the range of equality, so it's pretty much anyone's game at this point. And we continue with the usual maneuvers. Bishop e6, attacking my queen. I go back to c2, so shoring up the center and still planning to play d4 at the appropriate moment. Rook e8. I thought this was preparing the move bishop f8, which is often in a maneuver. You put the bishop on f8, later maybe play g6 and bishop g7. Or if you end up having to play h6 to keep a knight or a bishop out of the square g5, the bishop on f8 lends support to the pawns along that diagonal. So it's a good general purpose move. But my opponent had different ideas. I go knight g3. He goes g6 first, and now I push with d4. So maybe he had in mind this maneuver. He was just doing it in a different order. But the action starts in the center now, so he doesn't have time to complete that maneuver if that was what he planned. So I take. But you see, black still has a slight edge here. Rook c8, hitting my queen. So this is well played. Getting in those tempo moves is often an important thing to look for rather than just retaking automatically. Move my queen over here to e2 because I don't want to block my bishop. But he has this nice move, bishop to c4, forcing my queen to move again. So I went, the engine thinks I should go back to d2, but I went up to e3 here, blocking my bishop, but at least it has one square to go to. And maybe I will play, I think I end up playing b3 here to kick the bishop. So right now, the engine thinks black should keep the advantage by playing e takes d4. Well, you can see it's still a very slight edge. My opponent played the second choice here, b4. Not such a big deal. I play b3 to kick his bishop, and he retreated to b5. He wants to keep the bishop on this diagonal. I think that's probably a good idea. I mean, it's controlling these squares, and I can't place my pieces on them. And my bishop, well, my bishop has now got a square on b7, so both sides are probably okay in this position. Is there a better move than b5? No, I guess it's about the same. I mean, he could have retreated back to e6, but then I can push on with d5. Maybe kind of close off the center there and take away squares from his pieces. So, not a bad move. Bishop b2, but somehow, well, the advantage still, like I said, these are very small numbers, so the advantage doesn't mean a whole lot. We get this exchange, and now after that, maybe I have a little bit of pressure. He does have this isolated pawn here. My pawn can be defended by the move f3 if needed, whereas his pawn is isolated. And maybe I can build up pressure, and I have potentially a good square here. If we can talk about the squares for a minute. And black, on the other hand, has a has a good square on e5, but it'll take him a move or two to maneuver a piece to take advantage of it. I pushed on with d5 immediately, so the engine thinks, oh no, it's black's move here. He pushed on with d5 immediately. The engine thinks, yeah, as the engine thinks on this position for a while, it likes white more and more. So the engine is suggesting knight d7 or bishop f8. Okay, well, bishop f8 I think is part of this maneuver to come out along this diagonal to one of these squares. Probably this square. And knight d7, okay, that is with the idea of this maneuver going after that good square. Instead, he played d5. And so now maybe I have an advantage here that's significant at this point. After this move, I was noticing that he's got kind of a weak diagonal here, and I was trying to think of ways to take advantage of that. But I ended up playing knight takes b5, just grabbing the bishop. That is one of the engine choices, but the engine much prefers e5. So let's take a look at e5 for a second. If I just push on, he needs to move the knight, doesn't he? It says bishop c5. Oh, this pawn is pinned, so I'm not really threatening. After the bishop moves out of the way, it pins the pawn. And then queen to h6, unpinning the pawn and threatening the knight. Knight goes to e4. Okay, he's got a good post for his knight. And I push on with e6. Ah, so this is interesting. e6 also opens up this diagonal. So that's a pretty interesting way to play, and then maybe strong for white. So after d5, I didn't play that. I wasn't sure how that would work out. I decided instead to grab the bishop so that I would have a bishop pair. But after I made this exchange, I had kind of second thoughts about it. I mean, I don't have the bishop pair for one thing. I only have one bishop, and he has one bishop. So there's no bishop pair advantage. And these two pawns, although they're doubled, they hold back these two pawns, so things are about even on the queen side. And still the only weakness is this this d5 pawn of black's. So once again, I should push on with e5. In this situation, I did think about it, but I was a little bit worried about the move d4 here. It says this is okay. Bishop takes. Oh yeah, that is protected. I can just grab that. d4, bishop takes, and knight d5. Okay, so I missed my chance to play e5 in both places. And if I wasn't going to push the pawn forward, I should have brought a rook over to the center at least and pinned that pawn. Instead, I played queen to f4. So I think that move is a mistake, a definite mistake. And then he grabs a pawn, and it lets him, you know, I have some slight edge here, but basically, well, I gain a tempo move with the rook. And then I get the pawn back. So, but it's just even in material, and the advantage is in white's favor. There's a slight advantage for white, but nothing to write home about. So I missed my chance for the strongest advantage. And I think black, with accurate play, could probably draw this game. Now this is the point where we got disconnected right here. And so when my opponent came back, I think he was maybe a little bit not so much in the game, because he played a good game up to this point. He played bishop f8. Well, this is still a good move. And although I thought maybe he should have exchanged. Okay, well, he's preparing to exchange. He can't exchange immediately. And I don't want to exchange rooks. I want to keep the force on the board. So I play this with the idea of penetrating to the 7th rank. And now he could play queen b8, challenging my queen. Yeah, I think if black just trades everything off, it's an easily drawn position. So I need to keep the force on and keep playing for tricks and things, or the attack. Plays bishop g7. It's not a fatal mistake, but it's a bit of a mistake because it allows me to get this move rook to d7 with tempo, and now I'm threatening to take here, and he doesn't have time to take my bishop. So he needs to defend the f-pawn, and there's two ways to do it. I thought rook f8 was forced here, but the engine points out that queen e6 is probably the best way to defend it. So there were two ways to defend the pawn, rook f8 or queen e6. And with queen e6, the advantage is still in white's favor here, but it's a pretty slight advantage. I'm not sure I could really manage to win this. What's the engine suggestion? The engine suggests taking and playing rook d1 to d6. Okay, chasing the queen away. Queen f5. And then taking. Okay. And playing this endgame where I guess it's thinking that white has a better pawn structure than black. And, you know, these are some weaknesses, but black's king is over here to defend it. I would not be at all confident about winning that endgame. Although it's possible. I mean, I would certainly play on. I would have some edge. But instead of playing either queen e6 or rook f8, those are the only two moves that defend, he played rook c7, which unfortunately doesn't work at all. After queen takes f7, it's just mate in two. So my opponent realized his mistake and resigned at this point. And that's how the game ended. Hope you guys enjoyed that. Leave any comments you have in the section below, and I will see you again soon. Bye.